44 minutes past the hour. We thank you for staying with the Daily Report. As we promised you earlier on, we have our guest tonight, who is J.M. Waiganjo, a commissioner with the Independent Policing Oversight Authority, that is IPOA. Our topic of conversation tonight being policing the police. Bwana Commissioner, welcome back and thank you for staying with us.
Thank you for having me.
Brilliant. And I want to begin from what we've seen, especially when the protests began. And for 4 days, just about 4 days, the protests seemed normal and had progressed for quite a while. And, the Gen Z were making their demands known in what has largely been viewed as a peaceful protest until the police stepped in. Do you share the same opinion that every time there are protests, it is the police who make things worse?
Not necessarily. Like you have observed, the demonstrations were quite passive, actually peaceful for the first days. But then again, our observation is that they were also hijacked by people who are not Gen Z demonstrators per se. And the only fault we are finding with the police is their lack of concentration with the goons who invaded the demonstration, and instead seems to disperse the crowds unilaterally. So what we have been recommending is that there is need to isolate the goons from the protesters. And the reasoning is that, as you know, mainly when there's an opportunity like that, you are likely to get people who do not necessarily come to demonstrate, but to root and destroy property.
Yes.
One of the functions of the police is to protect life and property. And in an instance where the police now finds that there are people who are rooting, then it is at such moments when they are supposed to intervene, probably even use their arms. We have also seen protesters attacking the police, and we have many, many cases. In fact, we have about 140 officers who are getting treatment out of injuries which they got during the protests. So it's both sides. On one hand, there are goons or criminals who are joining the protesters, and on the other hand, we need our police to do more and cooperate with the protesters so that the genuine protesters are guarded, the criminals are weeded out.
Do you think it is difficult? Because a number of the scholars who have spoken to us, those we've spoken to, they say the problem comes even due to the selection of those who go to handle the protests. So much so that, say, someone respectfully with just about your age would be able to identify someone who would be able to look like a goon or a criminal or an infiltrator, compared to a much younger whose psychological nature and composition is quick and gets irritated very quickly. Do you think that even the composition of the police officers dispatched could be a problem?
Well, on the age of the police officers, the GSU are normally between 18 and 28 years old. So you'll find that it's not possible really to bring older people in the beat. But more importantly, and this is what we have been recommending, is to get a law that regulates picketing. Because picketing is provided for in the Constitution, but we do not have a standalone legislation on how that picketing should be done. Of course, the Constitution says unarmed, peaceful, and all those things. But we need a proper registration where maybe even the space on which people demonstrate is highlighted, where the police will hold meetings with the marshals, and those who are the leaders of the demonstrations before the demonstration, because it's possible. They agree, we'll use Kimadi Street, then go to Halabe Avenue, then give our petition at Parliament, then congregate at Uhuru Park and finish. You see, if that kind of a law is there, then you would not expect protests which are being done, say, just as an example, on a different street other than where the demonstrations are supposed to be done, because it's in the law. But what we see now is that we do not even have meetings, the police do not even hold meetings with the demonstrators, which should happen. And that is the mischief that the law tried to cure when it was said, report, inform the police that you are going to demonstrate. So that information, the police is supposed to use that information to come and bring order to the protest, simply put. But as long as we do not have that kind of registration, people just picket, people just go to the streets and start their demonstrations. And that is why you will find that the goons sometimes are not clearly, separate from the main protesters. The last protest we saw, for instance, because we have monitors, we go to monitor those protests. Yes. So our monitors are with the demonstrators. But we realized that there are people who are just breaking the shops, doors, and moving on. They're not even getting in to steal. They break, they move on to the next to break, and then they move on to the next. And then there's another column following them, who are now getting inside the shops and looting. And so we realize this is well choreographed. It's premeditated, it's planned. So you see, those are easy to see and to know that they are goons and not ordinary demonstrators. So in my view, there should be proper registration on picketing so that the police are properly informed, and so that even when the police go to join to guard the protesters, they know the protesters from the goons. Because the moment the police start fighting the goons, when they are in the midst of protesters, so they throw, for instance, a tear gas canister on a crowd, it gets the crowd very excited. And now they start fighting the police. And that was not the primary objective. So we know that the police are going through a lot of difficulties trying to control the crowds. But we also know that there are officers who are trigger happy, and we've been trying to know whether those were orders or they acted on their own motion. And those are the investigations we are carrying out. Indeed.
You've brought about the issue of investigations, and Kenyans went ahead to, quote unquote, help the IPOA to identify these people. And many questions that we've been seeing even on social media are, okay, fine, this is the information. How difficult is it to apprehend these people and bring them to face the law?
Investigations is a process. It's a process, and gathering information and gathering evidence and exhibits. It's a process. I have seen people saying, now look, they show a video of an officer shooting, and then they say, what much else do you need? But now we need that gun. We need to know, we need the arms movement register to know where that gun was, who was allocated that gun, where is that bullet.
The burden of proof.
Yes.
Okay.
The evidence. Courts are led by evidence. Our investigations are prosecution-led. So we have to do ballistics investigations.
Survey,
yeah, we have to talk to the victim. If the victim is dead, we have to go for the post-mortem and get the post-mortem report. Once we get that, we have to talk to the officer himself and the commander who sent the officer. And then on the basis of what now we get, we determine whether this is a proper case for prosecution. Once we make that determination, we forward our file to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, because we don't have prosecutorial powers ourselves. And then once the officer is satisfied that our evidence is sufficient or meets the threshold of prosecution, then the file is brought back to us, and then we register the matter in court, get the officer arrested, disarmed, and interdicted, and then the matter starts. So we don't rush to court, because again, remember, that officer has rights as well, and he could also come up with a defense. We have to be satisfied that the circumstances under which he used his firearm were not merited. All were merited. Because, and the other thing we would want the protesters to know is that the police, there are instances when the police can use those guns. So if you're out to provoke, then you have to know what you are doing. Because they use that gun to protect property, for their own safety, self-defense, and to protect another person who probably is in danger. So under those instances and the pressure put on the police, because you can see the number of demonstrators against the number of the officers. And we have also seen instances like in Bondo where we found an officer being crowbared by the public, and he's armed, but he restrained himself, so he didn't use even his firearm. So, and that's why I was saying there are good officers, there are bad officers, there are trigger-happy officers, but the protesters must know that at some point the police could use those firearms. Could use those firearms. Yes.
Indeed. What is from your records and your history, what is the shortest amount of time that it has taken for IPOA to logically and conclusively achieve or end an investigation? A single case, perhaps.
Under ordinary circumstances, because these are extraordinary circumstances.
Yes.
When there are no demonstrations or protests, and we get a case of police brutality or murder or serious injuries, it takes us as short as even 2 months. Because then, we are dealing on a file-by-file basis. Yes. And we are able to carry out those investigations. But then again, remember, we are not the head, because after we carry our investigation, it could even take us a month to compile our file, because some of the matters are quite straightforward. But the moment we forward the file to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, the file moves out of our hands. And now we have to wait until the ODPP is satisfied or makes his notes. Sometimes returns the file to us to ask us to do more, or returns the file to us to tell us to proceed with the process, to register the matter in court. So, and you see again, once the matter now also leaves the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, it goes to court. That's another arm of government, the judiciary. The judiciary has its own schedules, cost lists, and that case now could stay in court even for 6 months.
Yes.
Yeah. So the problem is not even our investigations. The problem is where does the file go next?
Okay.
For instance, we have already forwarded up to 8 files to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions on these recent demonstrations. But we haven't seen somebody taken to court.
Ah.
Yeah. So we are very hopeful that perhaps in the next few days we need to see officers taking plea in court, appearing in courts.
Okay.
Yeah, so you see, we have already completed those 6-7 files. We have forwarded them to
these protests.
Yeah, of these protests. We are looking at about 42 mandats, which is that's across the country.
Yes.
Yeah, so our investigations could be quicker, but then the wheels of justice grides very slowly. Because it's about due diligence also. People have rights. You are innocent until you're proved guilty. And we also don't want to do a shoddy job. Because if we go to court and we start getting acquittals of officers we have taken to court, then we will be liable for malicious prosecution, for example.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so we have to make sure that the people we are taking to court, we are almost 99% sure that
watertight.
Yeah, watertight.
Absolutely. Going back to the law of protecting lives and property between especially the roles of the police, I've got a question here from Victor, and I'll coin it because he asks, ask if the police need to identify themselves, especially non-uniform, because whereas protesters are supposed to notify the police, it should also be the police should say, okay, we will be deployed in this manner. We will not be having plainclothes police. What happens in this case? As you say, we are in extraordinary times. Should they be able to identify themselves?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it is the law. It is in the National Police Service Act, and it is also in the service standing orders that police man or woman has to be in uniform. They have to display their service number and their names. And they have to inform the person they are arresting why they are arresting them, what offense they have committed, and then they have to take that person to lawful custody. Not the abductions we are seeing. That is illegal. It is illegal for police to wear hoods, to hide themselves. Yeah, that is not the best practice. The best practice is that an officer has to be an officer a member of the National Police Service. So once we realize that they are not wearing their uniforms, you know, they are carrying out abductions, because arrests and abductions are completely very different. Because when arrest is supposed to be with honor and dignity. Yeah, because that person has rights and access to an advocate.
Yes.
But not the way we are seeing sometimes people just pushed into a vehicle and then they are whisked away. Yeah, so whenever the arrests are done, they should be dignified. The police should identify themselves before the arrest, and you have to be taken into lawful custody.
Indeed. Absolutely. Bwana Commissioner, let's take a short break. When we come back, we continue this conversation. You're watching The Daily Report. My guest being J.M. Waiganjo, a commissioner with the Independent Policing Oversight Authority, that is IPOA. Keep your feedback coming. We're back in a few minutes.